6 million pages. That is how many documents the Department of Justice collected on Jeffrey Epstein. Right now, as you watch this, millions of those pages are still hidden from you. Not because of national security, not because of ongoing criminal investigations, because the man who signed the transparency law is the man the documents are about. 3 FBI interview summaries describing allegations against the sitting president were removed from the public database. The FBI director told the Senate there was no credible evidence of trafficking to others. The FBI's own files say the opposite. And the cover-up is confirmed. Not alleged, not rumored, confirmed. And the country that was promised full transparency is instead watching the most elaborate document suppression operation in modern political history unfold in real time. Donald Trump did not just promise transparency on the Epstein files. He did not just sign the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law last November. He built an entire political identity around this promise. He told rally after rally that he would expose every powerful name. He told the American people that the elites were hiding the truth and that he alone would blow the doors wide open. Trump planned for these files to destroy his enemies. Instead, they are consuming his presidency from the inside out. And in the gap between that promise and that reality, survivors are being re-traumatized. Documents are vanishing from public databases overnight. And the Department of Justice is literally spying on members of Congress who try to read what the law says they are entitled to see. This is not a cover-up unfolding in the shadows. It is happening under fluorescent lights, in congressional hearing rooms, with Reuters photographers capturing the evidence in real time. In the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly how we got here. I am going to show you the specific FBI interview summaries the DOJ tried to hide, the Senate testimony that contradicts the Bureau's own internal records, and the bipartisan revolt that just forced a historic subpoena against the president's own attorney general. And I am going to explain, with documents and dates, why the political ground beneath this White House is measurably more unstable today than it was even 7 days ago. This is not speculation. This is not commentary dressed up as analysis. Every claim I am about to make has a name, a date, and a document number attached to it. Imagine you hire a security company to protect your house. You give them the keys, the alarm codes, the camera footage, everything. Then one morning, you discover they changed the locks, deleted the recordings, and started tracking which rooms you walk into and how long you stay. You did not hire them to protect themselves from you. You hired them to protect you from threats. Hold that thought. Because that is exactly what the United States Department of Justice just did to the United States Congress. And they got caught doing it on camera. With photographs. In a hearing room full of witnesses. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Did Trump walk into a trap of his own making by signing the Epstein transparency law? Or is this selective suppression part of a deliberate strategy that nobody outside his inner circle fully understands? Let us rewind the clock. Let us rewind the clock. Because this did not start last week. It did not start last month. It started on the campaign trail in 2024, when Donald Trump stood in front of thousands of supporters and made a promise that would eventually detonate underneath his own presidency. He said the American people deserved to see every document the government had on Jeffrey Epstein. He said the deep state was hiding the truth. He said he would blow the doors wide open and let the sunlight in. The crowds roared. The clips went viral. And the assumption underneath all of that theater was simple and catastrophic. Trump's entire Epstein strategy was built on one belief, that the files would implicate his political enemies and leave him completely untouched. That assumption was not slightly wrong. It was structurally wrong. Because the FBI's own records, dating back to investigations begun in 2006 and extending through witness interviews conducted in 2019, contain repeated references to Donald Trump that no amount of political spin can make disappear. His advisors knew this. Intelligence officials who had been briefed on the scope of the Epstein materials knew this. And when Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with overwhelming bipartisan support in November 2025, Trump signed it not because he wanted transparency. He signed it because vetoing it would have been political suicide. The man who made exposing the Epstein files his signature populist promise could not be the man who killed the bill. So he gambled. He bet that the sheer volume, 6 million pages, 2 Eiffel Towers of paper, according to the Deputy Attorney General, would bury whatever was in there about him under an avalanche of irrelevant noise. He was wrong about that, too. Because journalists do not drown in volume, they swim through it. And what they found at the bottom changed everything. It changed the story, it changed the politics, and it may yet change the presidency. Receipt number 1. The missing 302s. Hat tip to NPR, the investigative team that first broke this story wide open and forced the DOJ to act. When the Department of Justice began its massive release of Epstein files in late December 2025, reporters immediately started cross-referencing the published documents against known inventories and tracking numbers. What they found was alarming. FBI interview summaries, formerly known as 302 files, were missing from the public database. Not just any interviews. 3 specific FBI summaries documenting conversations with a woman who told federal agents that Jeffrey Epstein introduced her to Donald Trump when she was between 13 and 15 years old. The FBI interviewed this woman 4 times across 2019. Only one of those 4 interview summaries, the one where she did not mention Trump, appeared in the public database. The other 3, the ones where she described in graphic detail her alleged encounters with the sitting president, were absent. Now stop right there. These are not anonymous tips phoned into a hotline. These are formal FBI witness interviews, conducted by trained agents, documented in official bureau memoranda, assigned sequential tracking numbers that investigators use to maintain chain of custody and evidentiary integrity. The documents were cataloged. They were numbered. They were cross-referenced in a DOJ PowerPoint presentation summarizing the Epstein case. And then, they vanished from the public release. The Department of Justice later claimed the missing documents were mistakenly coded as duplicative. 3 separate interviews, conducted on 3 different dates, all involving the same allegations against the sitting president, all accidentally coded as duplicates. That is not an administrative error. That is not a clerical oversight. That is a pattern with a purpose. Receipt number 2. The burn book. Here is the part that should make your blood boil. In February 2026, the Department of Justice invited members of Congress to review unredacted Epstein files at a secure DOJ annex in Washington. They set up 4 computers in a small room. Lawmakers were required to leave their phones outside. They could only take written notes on government-issued notepads. DOJ staffers sat behind them, able to see their screens the entire time. Congressional staff were banned from the building entirely. And then, Attorney General Pam Bondi walked into her House Judiciary Committee oversight hearing on February 11th, carrying a thick black binder. Reuters and AFP photographers captured what was inside. A printed page clearly labeled Jayapal Pramila Search History. A complete log of every Epstein document that Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal had searched for, opened, and reviewed during her visit to the DOJ annex the previous day. The government told you it was offering congressional oversight of the Epstein files. Then it turned that oversight into a surveillance operation designed to prepare the Attorney General to deflect tough questions. That is not transparency. That is not cooperation. That is not how a democratic government treats the legislators who are legally charged with holding it accountable. That is the Department of Justice building an opposition research dossier on the people investigating it. Even House Speaker Mike Johnson, arguably the president's most reliable ally in Congress, said publicly that tracking lawmakers' searches was not appropriate. Jayapal called it a burn book. Jamie Raskin called it spying. Nancy Mace confirmed the DOJ was tagging every document every member opened. The word for that is not oversight. The word for that is obstruction. If this story is connecting dots you have not seen assembled anywhere else, you are already ahead of most people watching this unfold. I have not even gotten to the bipartisan subpoena yet, or the 3 scenarios for where this goes next. Hit subscribe right now. This is accelerating faster than any single outlet can track, and you need to be here when the next piece drops. We are building something here. Do not miss what comes next. Now compare the evidence that is emerging from these files to what the administration is actually saying out loud. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt released a formal statement to NPR, and this is a direct quote. The president has been totally exonerated by the release of the Epstein files. Totally exonerated. while the DOJ was actively removing documents that contained allegations against him from the public database. While 3 FBI interview summaries sat hidden for weeks, while 37 pages remain unaccounted for to this day. And their analysis is that this constitutes total exoneration. Then there is FBI Director Kash Patel. He sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee and was asked directly whether Epstein trafficked minors to other individuals. His response, under oath: "There is no credible information, none." Weeks later, Republican Congressman Thomas Massie pointed to the FBI's own 2019 internal document listing 10 co-conspirators by name, including Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret. Massie posted it publicly. The document had been redacted. When the redaction was challenged, the name appeared. These are not serious people managing a serious crisis. These are performers staging confidence while their own agency's records contradict them in real time. Receipt number 3. The bipartisan revolt. Here is the part that should keep the White House awake at night. On March 4, 2026, the House Oversight Committee voted 24-19 to subpoena Attorney General Pam Bondi for testimony on her handling of the Epstein files. This was not a partisan vote. 5 Republicans crossed party lines to join every Democrat on the committee. Nancy Mace, who introduced the motion, Lauren Boebert, Tim Burchett, Michael Cloud, Scott Perry. Read those names again. These are not moderates. These are not anti-Trump dissidents looking for an exit ramp. These are members of the president's own political base, people who built their careers on defending this administration, who looked at how the DOJ handled the Epstein files and decided that loyalty has a limit. Mace called it one of the greatest cover-ups in American history. She posted that 3 million documents had been released and they still did not have the full truth. Videos missing, audio missing, visitor logs missing. And she is not the only Republican who has broken ranks. Thomas Massie publicly contradicted Patel's Senate testimony by pointing to FBI documents that the director either had not read or chose to misrepresent. Marjorie Taylor Greene, once one of Trump's most vocal defenders, pushed so relentlessly for full transparency that Trump attacked her publicly, repeatedly, and she ultimately resigned from Congress. When a president starts losing the people who staked their political lives on defending him, the damage is no longer theoretical. It is no longer containable. It is structural. The fracture is inside the foundation, and foundations do not crack quietly. So let us step back from the receipts and look at the architecture of what is actually unfolding here. Because this is not a single scandal with a beginning and an end. This is a stress test happening in public of every institution that is supposed to hold power accountable in a democracy. On one side, you have an administration that promised radical transparency and delivered selective suppression. On the other, you have a coalition of journalists, bipartisan lawmakers, and survivors who are methodically dismantling that suppression, one document, one subpoena, one hearing at a time. Trump builds the narrative. The investigators build the record. Trump demands loyalty. The evidence demands accountability. Trump governs by press conference. The subpoena governs by law. One side is performance. The other is documentation. One side changes the story every news cycle. The other keeps receipts. There is one image from this entire saga that captures the story in a single frame. On one side, the White House press secretary, standing at a podium, reading a prepared statement declaring total exoneration while documents were still being hidden. On the other side, Epstein survivors, standing in a congressional hearing room during Bondi's testimony, raising their hands so that every lawmaker and every camera in the room could see that real human beings, not political abstractions, were harmed by the man these files are about, and by the system that protected him. One side is staging confidence, the other is demanding justice. The survivors did not scream. They did not interrupt. They did not need to match the administration's energy to be heard. They just showed up. And their silent presence in that hearing room carried more moral weight than every press release the White House has issued on this subject combined. Silence against noise, presence against performance, truth against spin. That is the contrast that matters. Not Republican versus Democrat, not left versus right. The contrast is between people who want the truth released and people who want the truth managed. And right now, the people who want it released are winning. Slowly, painfully, but measurably. So what does this actually mean for you? Not for congressmen, not for cable news pundits, not for political consultants. For the person watching this right now, sitting at home, trying to figure out what any of this has to do with their life. If you are a taxpayer, the Department of Justice assigned more than 500 lawyers and support staff to the Epstein file review process. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche described the volume as 2 Eiffel Towers of pages. That is your money funding a process that the government's own bipartisan Congressional Oversight Committee has now formally declared is incomplete, potentially obstructive, and in violation of the law Congress passed. Every dollar spent on selective redaction is a dollar diverted from actual prosecution of the people who enabled Epstein's crimes. If you are a parent or a grandparent, strip away every political layer of this story, and what you are left with is a simple question. Can the most powerful institutions in your country protect children from the most powerful people in your country? The FBI had a witness. They interviewed her 4 times across several months. The documents from those interviews were removed from public view. If the system cannot maintain the integrity of its own records when the allegations involve the president, what confidence can any parent have that the system works when the allegations involve someone without that kind of power? If you hold a 401k, an IRA, or any retirement savings tied to the market, pay close attention to the political instability this is generating. 5 Republicans just crossed the president to subpoena his own attorney general. That kind of fracture inside a governing party creates legislative gridlock, policy uncertainty, and investor hesitation. The VIX does not care about party loyalty. It cares about whether the people running the government can function as a unit, and right now, they cannot. If you are a veteran or have family in law enforcement, consider what it means when the director of the FBI either did not read or chose to misrepresent the contents of his own agency's files under oath before the United States Senate. That is not a political question. That is a competence and integrity question. And it should trouble every American who depends on that bureau to keep this country safe. Trump did not sign the Epstein Files Transparency Act to protect survivors. He signed it because vetoing it would have ended him politically. The consequences of that calculation are already arriving, and the man responsible is on television every day claiming total exoneration. Here is the hard truth. The survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes did not want this to become a political football. They wanted accountability. They wanted the names. They wanted the system that failed them for decades to finally, belatedly, do its job. But this administration's compulsive instinct for self-preservation left them no other option but to fight for every single page, every single redaction, every single hearing. The lawmakers pushing for transparency are not doing this out of partisan rage. They are not doing this for television clips. They are doing it because the math demands it. 6 million pages collected, 3.5 million released, millions more withheld. 37 pages still missing from one witness file alone. Trump did not suppress these documents to protect survivors. He suppressed them because of what they say about him. That is not an opinion. That is arithmetic. Where does this go from here? I see 3 paths. The first is the managed path. Bondi testifies before the Oversight Committee under subpoena. The DOJ, under sustained political and legal pressure, releases the remaining withheld documents. The administration reframes the entire episode as proof of its commitment to transparency, claims credit for a process it fought against at every turn, and the story gradually recedes from the front pages as the midterm election machinery takes over the news cycle. But even in this best case, the damage is already permanent. The precedent that a sitting president's own Justice Department can selectively remove documents about that president from a legally mandated public release can track the searches of congressional investigators reviewing those documents, and can have the FBI director misrepresent the contents of his own agency's files under sworn testimony. That precedent does not get unbuilt. That institutional scar does not heal with a press conference. The trust that was broken does not come back because someone says the right words at a podium. The second path is the realignment. This is the scenario that should genuinely terrify the White House. The bipartisan coalition that forced the Bondi subpoena does not dissolve after one hearing. It grows. More Republicans break ranks as the November midterms approach, and voters in swing districts start asking uncomfortable questions about what their representatives knew and when they knew it. The political realignment that follows is not left versus right. It is people who demand accountability versus people who protect power, regardless of party. Every Democratic government watching this, and make no mistake, they are watching very carefully, takes note. If the American system cannot hold its own executive branch accountable for suppressing evidence in a child sex trafficking case, what moral authority does it have to lecture any other country about the rule of law? And once that credibility is lost on the international stage, it does not get rebuilt with a diplomatic cable. It takes a generation. The third path is the one nobody wants to say out loud. The subpoena is ignored or fought in court for months. Bondi either refuses to testify or testifies and provides nothing of substance. The DOJ continues to withhold documents behind legal technicalities. The FBI director's misrepresentation of his own agency's records goes unchallenged by Republican leadership. And the country accepts, slowly, quietly, as a matter of lived precedent, that transparency laws signed by the president do not actually apply to the president. You would normally say no administration would be that reckless, but normal left the building a long time ago. And there are no more guardrails. Here is what I know for certain. Regardless of which path this takes, the Epstein files have already changed the political landscape of this country permanently. Even if every withheld document is released tomorrow morning, even if Bondi testifies with full cooperation and total candor, the fact that FBI interview summaries were removed from a public database, the fact that the DOJ surveilled the search histories of congressional investigators, the fact that the FBI director contradicted his own agency's records under oath, those facts are now part of the permanent public record. They do not get erased by a news cycle. Once institutional trust is broken at this level, it does not get repaired because someone holds a press conference or signs an executive order. It becomes the new baseline. It becomes the floor from which everything else is measured. The survivors did not start this fight. They did not want this fight, but they are proving to be extraordinarily resilient in the face of it. Not because they are loud, not because they have political power, because they are patient, because they keep showing up, because they refuse to let 6 million pages be reduced to a talking point on a teleprompter. Trump is looking at the next rally. The survivors are looking at the next decade. And right now, the next decade is being shaped by everyone except the people trying to bury the truth. That is the new playbook, and it was not written in Washington. It was written in hearing rooms and newsrooms and survivors' support groups, by people who refused to stop reading when the government told them the page was blank. Did the DOJ suppress these files to protect the president? Or did Trump do this to himself by making a promise he was never prepared to keep? And when the full record finally comes to light, and it will come to light, will the people who repeated total exoneration, who defended the redactions, who looked the other way when the FBI director contradicted his own files under oath, will they still say it was worth it? What does accountability look like in a country where the man who signed the transparency law is the man the documents are about? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one of them. Subscribe because the Bondi subpoena testimony has not happened yet, and when it does, the next chapter of this story is going to define whether transparency laws mean anything in this country at all. This story is not slowing down. Do not look away. This content is commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. Consult qualified experts before making any decisions based on the information presented.